Some politicians talk about champagne socialism. Senator John Kennedy just proved it exists, and he had the receipts to prove it. The hearing room of the Senate Committee on Government Ethics and Oversight was supposed to be routine, another Tuesday afternoon in Washington, where nothing ever really happens. Instead, it became a public execution, broadcast live to 47 million viewers who watched in real time as the most famous congresswoman in America was systematically destroyed by a 71-year-old man with a Louisiana drawl and the patience of a sniper. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked into that room wearing confidence like armor, her signature red lipstick applied with precision, her designer suit tailored to perfection, her social media army ready to defend her against another old white man trying to silence a woman of color. She had no idea she was about to face something far worse than silence. She was about to face the truth. Senator John Kennedy sat across from her, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his rumpled suit giving him the appearance of someone's kindly grandfather, someone you'd underestimate, someone you'd dismiss as a relic from a bygone era. That would be your first mistake, because behind those glasses was a Rhodes Scholar who'd graduated from Oxford, a lawyer who'd argued cases before the Supreme Court, and a man who'd spent 5 decades learning exactly how to dismantle an opponent with nothing but facts and a smile. The topic was supposed to be social media's influence on democratic institutions. It was supposed to be safe territory for AOC, the queen of Instagram, the master of viral moments, the woman who turned Twitter threads into political weapons. But Senator Kennedy had other plans. He had 6 folders arranged before him, each one a different color, each one containing evidence that would unravel not just a political career, but an entire mythology that had been carefully constructed over 3 years. When AOC opened her mouth to mock him, to dismiss him as a fossil who needed to step aside for people who understood the future, she sealed her fate. Because Kennedy had been waiting for exactly that moment, that flash of arrogance, that certainty that she was untouchable. He'd spent 6 months preparing for this hearing, following money trails through shell companies, interviewing whistleblowers from her own campaign staff, collecting photographs and bank statements and text messages that told a story very different from the one AOC had been selling to millions of adoring fans. The cameras were rolling. Twitter was already celebrating AOC destroying another old white guy. The hashtags were ready. The narrative was set. And then Senator Kennedy smiled, reached for the first folder and said 7 words that would change everything. "Well, bless your heart, Representative. Let's begin." What followed was not a debate. It was not a discussion. It was a methodical, surgical dismantling of a carefully constructed public persona, executed with the patience of a man who knew he had all the evidence he needed and all the time in the world to present it. The red folder came first, appropriately colored for what it contained. Kennedy opened it slowly, deliberately, his Louisiana drawl stretching each word like taffy, making the audience lean in, making AOC shift uncomfortably in her seat. He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He simply presented fact after fact, each one more damaging than the last, each one supported by documentation that AOC couldn't dispute because it came from her own social media posts, her own campaign filings, her own financial disclosures. The Met Gala dress, $35,000 borrowed from a designer while her district had the highest unemployment rate in New York City. The after-party photographs showing her laughing with billionaires, the same billionaires she'd spent the previous week demonizing on Twitter. The mysterious donations that flooded her campaign account 3 days after that party, donations from LLCs and foundations that traced back to the very hedge fund managers and tech moguls she claimed to oppose. Kennedy laid it all out with the care of a jeweler displaying diamonds, except these stones were evidence of hypocrisy so profound it made even her supporters uncomfortable. Maria Santos, a single mother from AOC's district, had applied for assistance during the pandemic. She'd been told resources were limited, but there were resources for a $35,000 dress. There were resources for limousines and champagne and designer shoes, just not for Maria Santos and her 3 children. The committee room, which had started with the ambient noise of shuffling papers and whispered conversations, fell into a silence so complete you could hear the air conditioning hum. AOC's carefully practiced expressions, her arsenal of righteous indignation and wounded dignity, flickered across her face like a broken television signal. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to contextualize, but Kennedy simply raised one weathered hand and continued, his voice never rising, never showing anger, just disappointment laced with iron determination. "That was just folder number 1, he said softly, his fingers drumming on the green folder. "We've got 5 more to go. And sugar, they get worse. Much worse." The second folder, green as the movement AOC had claimed to champion, contained the carbon footprint of someone who preached environmental salvation while living like an oil baron. 200 Uber rides in 12 months, private jets to climate conferences, a heated rooftop pool in December, $1,700 grocery bills featuring Wagyu beef and water imported from Fiji. Kennedy read each item in his slow, measured cadence, giving the audience time to absorb the staggering hypocrisy of someone who'd told working families to use candles instead of light bulbs, while her own electric bill averaged over $3,000 monthly. But the truly devastating evidence came from the Instagram posts AOC's team had accidentally left up for a few hours before deleting them. Behind-the-scenes footage of her documentary about climate change, showing her riding the subway for exactly 1 stop, long enough to film a scene about using public transportation, before immediately exiting and complaining about the smell to her assistant. That smell, Kennedy noted with devastating simplicity, is what working people deal with every single day while you preach at them from your air-conditioned Uber. The environmental activists who'd supported her, who'd believed in her, who'd donated their time and money to her Green New Deal, had signed a petition, 200 signatures asking her to stop using their cause for photo ops. Kennedy held it up, let the cameras zoom in on the names, let the audience see that these weren't Republicans or conservatives trying to take her down. These were her own people, exhausted by the performance, disgusted by the reality. AOC's hands, perfectly manicured and adorned with rings that cost more than most Americans spend on groceries in a month, trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. The confident smirk she'd worn walking into the hearing had vanished, replaced by something that looked like the beginning of panic, because she was starting to realize something that Kennedy had known from the moment she'd mocked him. This wasn't a debate she could win with clever sound bites. This wasn't a Twitter thread she could control. This was a reckoning, and it was being broadcast live to the entire world. Kennedy closed the green folder with a soft thump that seemed to echo in the silent room. "In Louisiana," he said, his voice carrying that musical drawl that made even devastating accusations sound almost gentle, "we've got a saying about folks who preach one thing and practice another. We call it environmental blackface. You're wearing the cause like a costume while making a mockery of people who actually believe in it." The phrase hit like a thunderclap. Several Democrats on the committee visibly flinched. AOC's chief of staff buried his face in his hands. And Twitter, which had been gleefully preparing to celebrate another AOC victory, suddenly went very, very quiet. The third folder, yellow as a caution sign, contained the evidence of campaign finance violations so blatant that even AOC supporters would struggle to defend them. Kennedy opened it with the reverence of a prosecutor unveiling murder weapon evidence, because in political terms, that's exactly what it was. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he began, adjusting his glasses with deliberate care, "you've built quite a reputation as a champion of campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics, transparency, all that good government stuff that plays well on Instagram." He pulled out Federal Election Commission reports, bank statements, and internal emails that told a very different story. The shell game began with her chief of staff's consulting firm, Brand New Congress LLC. AOC's campaign had paid them $1.7 million, which was perfectly legal on paper. But Kennedy traced that money through 5 different LLCs, each one controlled by members of AOC's inner circle, until nearly $1 million ended up in personal accounts, including $27,000 paid directly to her live-in boyfriend for vague consulting services. "Now I'm just a simple country lawyer," Kennedy said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "but where I come from, Paying your boyfriend with campaign funds is like tipping yourself at your own restaurant. It just ain't done. The evidence kept coming, each revelation more damaging than the last. Catering bills that claimed $15,000 but where the actual caterer only received $3,000, with the rest going to a Venmo account belonging to AOC's assistant with the note for the Gucci fund. Small dollar donations that had been the foundation of her populist appeal, the $27 contributions from regular working Americans, except 40% of them didn't exist. Fake names, fake addresses, but real money that traced back to union PACs who'd broken up large donations into small chunks to circumvent campaign finance laws. That's called smurfing, Kennedy explained to the audience. In the financial crime world, it's also called a felony. Community outreach funds that went to a company registered to AOC's second cousin at an address that turned out to be a vacant lot in the Bronx. Campaign strategy meetings held in Miami during Art Basel, with hotel rooms costing $4,000 a night and $7,000 in bottle service, charged to volunteer appreciation. But the nuclear weapon was still in Kennedy's arsenal. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked Department of Justice and held it up for the cameras. "This arrived at my office yesterday," he said, his voice taking on a grave tone. "It's a target letter informing me that Representative Ocasio-Cortez's campaign is under federal investigation for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit campaign finance fraud." AOC stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice rising to a pitch that betrayed her panic. "Political persecution. You can't do this." "Sit down," the committee chairman said firmly. "Senator Kennedy still has the floor, and Kennedy wasn't finished. Not even close." He produced the most damaging evidence of all, text messages between AOC and her chief of staff, provided by a whistleblower who'd worked on her campaign and couldn't stomach the corruption anymore. Kennedy read them aloud in his slow Louisiana drawl, giving each word the weight it deserved. "We need to move another 50,000 through the LLC. Make it look like media buys. And AOC's response, just make sure it can't be traced. I need a new place in D.C. Another message, can we destroy the old server before the FEC audit? And another, coach Sarah on her testimony. She needs to say she doesn't remember the Miami meeting." Each text was dated, authenticated, and completely indefensible. The committee room was in chaos now. Reporters were frantically typing. Camera operators were zooming in on AOC's face, capturing every microexpression of fear and realization. Her Democratic colleagues were physically leaning away from her, creating visible distance for the cameras. Her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, probably telling her to plead the fifth, but AOC's ego wouldn't let her stay silent. She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice cracked, and the words came out in a jumbled mess of half-sentences and contradictions. Kennedy let her struggle for a moment, then continued with the patience of a man who had all day. "You know what the real tragedy is, Representative." His voice was almost sad now, carrying a note of genuine disappointment. "You ran as the working-class hero, the bartender who'd change Washington, but you've been stealing from the very people who believed in you. $5 donations from minimum wage workers, from retirees on Social Security, from students working 3 jobs, all of it funding your champagne lifestyle, your designer clothes, your Miami getaways." He pulled out one final document from the yellow folder, a letter written in shaky handwriting. "This is from Margaret Williams, a 78-year-old retiree from your district. She donated $500 from her Social Security checks because she believed in you. That money, according to the paper trail, went to pay for your boyfriend's PlayStation and your trip to Miami. How do you think Mrs. Williams feels about that, sugar?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable, devastating in its simplicity. AOC had no response because there was no response. The evidence was overwhelming, the paper trail complete, the betrayal absolute. Kennedy closed the yellow folder and reached for the blue one, and several people in the audience actually gasped because they realized this was only halfway through, that there were 3 more folders waiting, 3 more rounds of revelations. Campaign finance fraud was trending on Twitter. Multiple Democratic senators were already drafting statements distancing themselves from AOC. Cable news had cut away from regular programming to cover the hearing live. The woman who'd been the darling of progressive politics, the future of the Democratic Party, the voice of a generation, was being systematically destroyed on live television by a 71-year-old man from Louisiana who talked like Foghorn Leghorn and thought like a prosecutor building a RICO case. The blue folder felt heavier somehow, weighted with something more personal, more cruel. Kennedy opened it with visible reluctance, as if what he was about to reveal gave him no pleasure. "Now, Representative," he began, his voice softer now, "we need to talk about your abuela, your grandmother down in Puerto Rico." AOC's eyes widened. This was family. This was supposed to be off-limits. This was sacred ground. "Oh, don't look at me like I just drowned your puppy," Kennedy continued. "You're the one who made her famous, put her all over social media, made her a symbol." He pulled out printed tweets, blown up large enough for the entire committee room to see. "My abuela's house still has damage from Hurricane Maria. Trump abandoned Puerto Rico." The tweet had gotten 2.8 million likes, had been featured in dozens of news articles, had cemented AOC's image as someone who cared about her family, about her community, about the forgotten people of Puerto Rico. Kennedy produced photographs of the grandmother's house, the damaged roof, the water stains, the mold growing on the walls. Heartbreaking images that had fueled so much righteous anger about government neglect and climate change and systemic inequality. "So when Matt Walsh," Kennedy continued, "not my favorite person, but even a broken clock is right twice a day, when he raised $100,000 to fix your grandmother's house, you know what Representative Ocasio-Cortez did?" The pause stretched out, painful in its length. She refused it, sent it back, said she didn't want charity from conservatives. Your grandmother is living with a damaged roof, and you turned down $100,000 because accepting it would make you look bad politically. The committee room erupted in shocked murmurs. Even AOC's supporters looked uncomfortable. But Kennedy wasn't done, not even close. He pulled out bank statements and campaign finance reports that told an even darker story. "After you posted about your grandmother, after those tweets went viral, your campaign raised $2.7 million specifically for Puerto Rico relief. People donated because they saw your grandmother suffering and wanted to help. You know how much of that money actually made it to Puerto Rico?" Kennedy let the question hang for a moment. "Zero. Not a peso. Not a penny. Not $1. That money went to administrative costs, to consulting fees, to awareness campaigns. You know what awareness campaigns means? That's you flying first class to Puerto Rico for photo opportunities." Kennedy produced receipts from the Four Seasons in San Juan, $1,200 a night, showing AOC stayed there during her Puerto Rico relief trip, posting photos of herself helping during the day, then spending nights in luxury that most Puerto Ricans couldn't imagine. But the most devastating evidence came from Puerto Rico itself. Kennedy played a video from Univision, an interview with AOC's grandmother conducted in Spanish with English subtitles. The elderly woman sat in her damaged home, water stains visible on the walls behind her, and spoke with the weary honesty of someone who'd been used one too many times. "I don't understand why Alexandria uses my problems for politics," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. "I told her not to put my house on the internet. She never visits, only when there are cameras." The reporter asked about the fundraising, about the millions raised in her name. "What money?" AOC's grandmother asked, confusion evident on her weathered face. "I haven't seen any money. My roof still leaks. Nobody has come to fix anything." The video ended, and the silence in the committee room was absolute, broken only by the sound of AOC crying, her perfect makeup now running in dark streams down her face. Kennedy produced more documents, his methodical destruction continuing without mercy. "Remember when President Trump offered $13 billion in Puerto Rico aid, and you led the charge to reject it? Said it came with too many strings attached. Those strings were accountability measures to prevent corruption, the kind of corruption where relief money disappears into consulting fees and awareness campaigns." He pulled out a letter from the mayor of Aguadilla, AOC's grandmother's town, written on official letterhead. The mayor writes, and I quote, "Representative Ocasio-Cortez used our suffering for political gain while blocking actual aid. She has exploited our tragedy for her personal brand. She is not welcome here." Kennedy looked up from the letter, his expression sad. Not welcome in your own grandmother's town. That's quite an achievement, Representative. But there was one more piece of evidence, one final dagger. Kennedy produced a contract between AOC's media company and a streaming service for a documentary about Puerto Rico's suffering. The documentary would tell the story of climate change, of government neglect, of communities struggling to rebuild. It would feature AOC as the hero fighting for her people, and her fee as executive producer was $275,000. Kennedy let that number sink in. Your grandmother's roof could have been repaired for $30,000, but you made $275,000 making a documentary about her suffering. He pulled out one last photograph, recent, showing AOC's grandmother's house still covered with a tarp, still damaged, still waiting for help that never came. But this, Kennedy said, holding up another photo, this is your new Tesla. $97,000. That's 3 new roofs for your abuela. But I guess some things are more important than family. The disgust in the committee room was palpable. Even the Democrats looked sick. One representative actually got up and left, unable to watch anymore. AOC was slumped in her chair now, her designer blazer wrinkled, her perfect image completely shattered. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come because there was no defense. She'd used her own grandmother's suffering for political gain and personal profit while leaving the old woman to live under a tarp. Kennedy closed the blue folder with a gentleness that somehow made the gesture more damning. In Louisiana, he said softly, we have a saying, you can judge a person by how they treat their grandmother. Well, sugar, the judgment is in and it ain't pretty. He reached for the purple folder, and AOC visibly flinched because she knew more was coming, knew the destruction wasn't over, knew that the Southern gentleman with the rumpled suit and patient smile hadn't finished dismantling her piece by piece. The purple folder landed on the desk with a weight that seemed to compress the air in the room. Kennedy opened it slowly, and even from across the table, AOC could see photographs, economic reports, letters written in desperate handwriting. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Kennedy began, his drawl thickening with emotion, let's discuss your greatest victory. Chasing Amazon out of New York. You celebrated it on Twitter, called it a win for the working class, said you'd stopped corporate welfare. Remember that? AOC straightened slightly, finding a flicker of her old defiance. This was territory where she'd always felt confident, where the progressive base had celebrated her as a hero standing up to corporate greed. We stopped $3 billion in subsidies to one of the richest companies on earth, she said, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. That money could have gone to schools, to hospitals, to the people who actually need it. Kennedy's laugh was short and bitter, devoid of his usual folksy humor. You stopped 25,000 jobs, Representative, in your own district, in one of the poorest areas of New York City. But let's go through this nice and slow, like explaining quantum physics to a fence post. He pulled out Amazon's original proposal, the economic impact studies, the job breakdowns. Average salary was $150,000. Jobs for everyone from janitors making $40,000 a year to engineers making $300,000. The kind of opportunity that transforms entire communities, lifts families out of poverty, sends kids to college. Kennedy produced a map of AOC's district, marked with red circles showing areas of highest unemployment. 21% unemployment among young adults. Median household income $44,000. Amazon would have doubled that overnight, would have created a rising tide that lifted all boats. But the $3 billion in tax breaks, AOC tried to interrupt, her voice desperate. Were not cash handouts, Kennedy cut her off sharply, his patience finally wearing thin. They were tax credits on taxes Amazon would pay. If Amazon pays $10 billion in taxes and gets $3 billion back, that still leaves New York with $7 billion it didn't have before. That's not corporate welfare, sugar. That's called investment. That's called economic development. That's called creating opportunity. But you either lied about understanding basic math, or you actually don't understand it, and I'm not sure which is worse. He pulled out a video on his tablet, pressed play. This is from the victory party after Amazon pulled out. That's you, Representative, popping champagne with your squad, celebrating while the cameras rolled, while Twitter exploded with praise for your principled stand against corporate greed. Kennedy swiped to another video. And this is what was happening in Queens at the exact same time. The footage showed a community center packed with crying people, a middle-aged Latino man, tears streaming down his face, speaking to a local news camera. "My son just graduated with a degree in computer science. This Amazon job would have changed our lives. Now he's applying to work at Target for $14 an hour." Another clip showed an older black woman in her 50s, her voice breaking. "I've been cleaning offices for 30 years. Amazon would have needed hundreds of cleaners, paying $25 an hour plus benefits and health care. Now I'm still making 15 with nothing." "These are your constituents," Kennedy said, his voice heavy. "While you were popping champagne, they were crying. While you were celebrating on Instagram, they were watching their dreams die. But you got your viral moment, so I guess that's what really matters." The evidence kept mounting, each piece more damaging than the last. Kennedy produced credit card statements and Amazon delivery logs. "Interesting thing about your Amazon boycott," he said with bitter irony. "These are delivery records to your congressional office. 2,847 Amazon packages in the last year. Everything from office supplies to that $400 espresso machine you posted about." He pulled out more receipts. "Your personal Amazon Prime account shows $78,000 in purchases since you defeated them. That includes the very laptop you tweeted your victory from, bought on Amazon with free Prime shipping. The hypocrisy is so thick you could serve it at Thanksgiving." "That's different," AOC tried to say, but her voice was barely a whisper now. "Different how?" Kennedy demanded. "You can use Amazon, but your constituents can't work there. You can benefit from their infrastructure, but families in Queens can't benefit from their paychecks." Kennedy produced internal Amazon emails, released during a subsequent lawsuit. "After you chased them out of New York, they built the exact same facility in Arlington, Virginia. Same jobs, same salaries, same investment. Only difference is those 25,000 jobs went to Virginians instead of New Yorkers. Those construction jobs, those engineering positions, those service industry opportunities that would have sprung up around the headquarters, all of it went somewhere else, because you cared more about your socialist brand than about actual people's lives." He pulled out unemployment statistics that painted a devastating picture. Long Island City now has the highest youth unemployment in New York City. Local businesses that had renovated their storefronts in anticipation of Amazon foot traffic, that had taken out loans and hired additional staff, went bankrupt. Kennedy held up a photograph of a food truck, colorful and new-looking. "This is the Gonzalez family. Puerto Rican, just like your grandmother. They invested their entire life savings, $50,000, in this food truck to serve the Amazon campus. They lost everything because you killed the deal." But the worst evidence was yet to come. Kennedy produced a thick stack of papers, hundreds of pages held together with a binder clip. "This is a petition signed by 15,000 Queens residents. They're asking you to apologize and try to bring Amazon back. They're asking you to fight for jobs with the same energy you fight for Instagram likes. You know what you did when they sent this to your office." AOC said nothing, just stared at the table. "You blocked them all on Twitter," Kennedy answered. 15,000 constituents trying to reach their representative, and you blocked them because they disagreed with you." Then he produced the union letters, and this was perhaps the most damaging evidence of all. "These are from labor unions, your supposed base. The Teamsters, the electricians' union, the plumbers and pipefitters, all furious because you cost them thousands of good-paying union jobs." Kennedy read from one letter, his voice filled with disgust. "AOC claims to support workers, but she killed the best opportunity we've had in decades. She doesn't speak for us. She speaks for herself, and we demand she resign." The union letter was signed by 37 local presidents representing over 200,000 workers. Kennedy pulled out one final photograph, and this one broke through even AOC's defenses. "This is Carlos Mendez," he said softly. "Single father, your constituent. He was going to be a security supervisor at Amazon. Would have tripled his income, finally been able to afford a decent apartment instead of the basement he rents. His daughter has asthma, severe asthma, needs expensive medication. After you killed the Amazon deal, Carlos couldn't afford her prescriptions anymore. She had an attack last month, spent 5 days in the hospital. The pause was long and heavy. She didn't make it, Representative. 9 years old, dead because her father couldn't afford her medicine, because you killed 25,000 jobs. The committee room was absolutely silent. Several people were crying. AOC's face had drained of all color. Her hands trembled visibly. Kennedy produced a hospital death certificate, held it up for the cameras. "This is real," he said, his voice shaking with emotion for the first time. "This isn't political theater. This isn't a debate about economic theory. This is a dead child, a preventable death. Your celebration killed her as surely as if you'd withheld the medicine yourself." He pulled out one final document from the purple folder, and this was the kill shot. "This is an internal memo from your staff, leaked by someone who couldn't stomach working for you anymore. You write, and I'm quoting directly, 'We need to kill this Amazon deal. It makes us look bad if capitalism actually helps workers. Better they stay poor and voting for us than get rich and stop needing us.'" Explosion of outrage was immediate. Committee members shouting, reporters gasping, AOC's Democratic colleagues standing up, physically distancing themselves. The memo was political suicide, proof of the most cynical kind of manipulation, keeping people in poverty to maintain political power. Kennedy's voice cut through the chaos. "You kept people poor on purpose, denied them opportunity to maintain your narrative, made them dependent so they'd keep voting for you. In Louisiana, we have a word for that. We call it evil." He closed the purple folder with a finality that sounded like a coffin closing. "You celebrated while families went hungry. You popped champagne while dreams died. You tweeted victory while your constituents applied for food stamps, all because you cared more about your socialist brand than their actual lives. Carlos Mendez's daughter was 9 years old. Her name was Sophia, and she died because of you." AOC was openly sobbing now, her carefully constructed image completely destroyed. But Kennedy wasn't done. He reached for the orange folder, and his expression was that of a man who'd found something so disgusting he almost didn't want to touch it. "Two more folders," he said quietly. "Let's talk about how the bartender became a millionaire while preaching about income inequality. Because, honey, this is where your socialism meets Swiss bank accounts." The orange folder seemed to glow with damning evidence as Kennedy opened it with the careful precision of a surgeon making the final, fatal cut. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he began, his Louisiana drawl stretching each syllable, "you came to Congress as a bartender. Modest means, student debt, living paycheck to paycheck, the American dream in reverse. That's the story you sold, and people bought it because it was relatable. It was real, or so we thought." He produced financial disclosure forms, laying them out like a royal flush. "Your net worth when you entered Congress was $15,000. Barely enough to cover moving expenses. But this," he pulled out updated documents, "this is your current net worth, $2.1 million. Kennedy let that number hang in the air. "In 3 years of public service, you've accumulated $2.1 million. Bernie Madoff would be impressed." AOC tried to speak, but Kennedy raised his hand. "Your congressional salary is $174,000 a year. After federal taxes, state taxes, living expenses in D.C., that's maybe $90,000 in take-home. Over 3 years, that's $270,000 total. But somehow you have $2.1 million. That's quite a magic trick, sweetheart. Let me guess. You invested wisely." He pulled out the book deals first. Contracts that showed advances so large they bordered on money laundering. "The Green New Deal," your first book. $850,000 advance. Now, I'm no publishing expert, but I did some research. Your book sold 11,000 copies. That means the publisher paid you $77 per book sold. Stephen King doesn't make that much, and his books actually sell. Kennedy produced sales figures and publishing industry analysis. "A normal advance for a first-time author, even a famous one, is maybe $50,000. You got $850,000 for a book that lost money. That's not publishing, that's payola. Your second book, Tax the Rich, got a $1.2 million advance, and you haven't even written it yet. Publishers usually want to see a manuscript before they hand over 7 figures unless they're paying for something else, like access, like influence, like the implicit understanding that you'll support policies that benefit their corporate interests." The speaking engagements came next, a parade of absurd payments for minimal work. Harvard University paid you $125,000 for a 30-minute speech about income inequality. That's over $4,000 per minute to tell rich kids that being rich is bad. The irony is thicker than Louisiana gumbo. MIT, Stanford, Yale, all paying six figures for brief appearances. Kennedy pulled out travel records showing AOC flying first class, staying in five-star hotels, dining at restaurants where appetizers cost more than her constituents spent on groceries weekly. But my absolute favorite, Kennedy said with relish, is your real estate portfolio. He produced property records. You bought a $1.2 million apartment in D.C. Cash purchase. No mortgage. Where does a bartender who entered Congress 3 years ago get $1.2 million in cash? The answer came in the form of wire transfers and LLC documents. Oh, here it is. A wire transfer from a consulting firm that traces back to the same unions that were funneling money through your campaign. Seems like they're good at spreading wealth around, just not to their actual members. But wait, Kennedy continued, there's more. You also own a vacation home in the Hamptons, purchased for $800,000, also cash. Between the D.C. apartment and the Hamptons house, that's $2 million in real estate alone. He pulled out photographs of the Hamptons property, a beautiful beach house with ocean views. This is where you summer, as the fancy folks say. Must be nice to escape the working-class struggle by going to one of the most expensive zip codes in America. The investment portfolio was perhaps the most hypocritical aspect. Kennedy produced brokerage statements showing $400,000 in stock market investments. You own shares in Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all the tech giants you rail against. But here's my favorite, Kennedy said, pulling out a specific trading record. You bought $50,000 in Amazon stock right after you chased them out of New York. Bought it the same week they announced they were moving to Virginia instead. Now I'm no SEC investigator, but that looks an awful lot like insider trading to me. You had information about where Amazon was relocating before the market did, and you profited from it. The same company you claimed to oppose, the same deal you killed, and you made money on it. The lifestyle evidence was equally damaging. Kennedy produced credit card statements showing Whole Foods bills averaging $2,000 monthly. That's more than most of your constituents make working full-time. Restaurant charges totaling $800 monthly at places with names in French that serve portions so small you need a magnifying glass. Designer clothing purchases totaling $147,000 in a single year. Bergdorf Goodman, Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, all the stores where rich people shop while pretending they're not rich. Kennedy pulled out receipts for specific items. Balenciaga shoes, $1,200. A Gucci handbag, $3,400. A single dress from Prada, $2,800. You spent more on one dress than a minimum wage worker in your district makes in a month. But I'm sure those designer clothes really help you connect with the working class when you're Instagramming from your Hamptons beach house. The travel records showed a pattern of excess that would make a Saudi prince blush. First-class flights everywhere. Never coach, always first. Five-star hotels, always suites, never standard rooms. A woman who preached about income inequality and the evils of wealth concentration lived like she was auditioning for Real Housewives of Congress. But here's what really burns me up, Kennedy said, his voice hardening. While you're living like a Kardashian, your district is suffering. Highest poverty rate in New York City. Families choosing between rent and food. Small businesses closing because they can't survive. And you're spending their annual income on handbags. Kennedy produced a photograph that would become iconic in its devastating contrast. This is you at a $35,000 per plate fundraiser in Martha's Vineyard. You're literally eating caviar in this shot. And this, he pulled out his phone, showing his Twitter feed. This is what you tweeted from that same dinner. The obscene wealth concentration in America is immoral. You were surrounded by billionaires, eating food that costs more than a car payment, tweeting about obscene wealth. The cognitive dissonance is stunning. But the absolute kill shot came from the tax returns. Kennedy produced 3 years of AOC's returns, highlighting specific numbers. You paid $42,000 in taxes last year on income of over $700,000. That's an effective tax rate of 6%, the same rate you call criminal when billionaires pay it. But I guess tax avoidance is only bad when Republicans do it. Kennedy pulled out more documents, his methodical destruction continuing without mercy. Your financial advisor, and yes, socialists apparently have those now, set up an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $400,000 sitting pretty in a tax haven, avoiding the very taxes you want to raise on everyone else. He produced bank statements from the account, routing numbers, transaction histories. This is the same kind of tax shelter you spent 3 years condemning, the same loopholes you promised to close. But when it's your money, suddenly those loopholes look pretty good, don't they, sugar? The committee room was filled with the sound of furious typing as reporters documented every revelation. AOC had stopped trying to maintain composure. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks. Her expensive blazer was rumpled. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose. The Instagram-ready congresswoman had been replaced by something raw and exposed and utterly destroyed. Kennedy pulled out one final comparison that drove the hypocrisy home with devastating clarity. "This is Maria Santos," he said, holding up a photograph of the same single mother he'd mentioned hours earlier. "She makes $32,000 a year as a home health aide in your district. She paid $4,800 in taxes last year. Her effective tax rate is 15%. She pays a higher percentage than you do, Representative. The woman cleaning bedpans and changing adult diapers is paying more of her income in taxes than the congresswoman who wants to tax the rich." Kennedy laid out the comparison in stark terms. "Maria lives in a one-bedroom apartment with her 3 children. You own 2 homes worth $2 million. Maria takes the subway every day. You take private cars and occasionally private jets. Maria shops at discount stores and uses coupons. You shop at Whole Foods and spend more in a week than she makes in a month. Maria is the working class. You just play one on Instagram." The evidence of AOC's transformation from bartender to millionaire was overwhelming, undeniable, sourced from public records and her own financial disclosures. Kennedy had taken the mythology she'd built around herself and systematically demolished it with nothing but facts. "You know what the saddest part is," Kennedy said, his voice carrying genuine sorrow now. "There are real socialists out there, people who actually live their values. Bernie Sanders, whatever you think of his politics, at least he's consistent. He's been saying the same things for 40 years and living modestly. He didn't get rich off the movement. But you," he gestured at the pile of evidence, "you saw an opportunity and you took it. You turned socialism into a brand and sold it to people desperate for hope. You're not a revolutionary. You're a profiteer with good marketing." Kennedy produced one final photograph, the kill shot that would dominate news coverage for weeks. "This is the food bank line in Queens, 2 blocks from your $1 million DC apartment. These people believed in you, voted for you, donated their last dollars to your campaign, and you got rich off their suffering." He closed the orange folder with a soft sound that seemed to echo through the devastated silence. "In Louisiana, we have a saying about people like you. You can't be a prophet and a profiteer. You can't preach poverty while practicing greed. But you've managed to do both, and you've done it while looking in the mirror every day and somehow convincing yourself you're still the good guy." Kennedy reached for the final folder, blood red, thicker than all the others, and his expression changed. The folksy humor was completely gone now. His face had hardened into something that looked like a judge about to pronounce sentence. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he said quietly, "everything we've discussed today, the lies, the corruption, the greed, all of that pales in comparison to what's in this folder. Because this isn't about money anymore. This is about blood." The blood-red folder sat on the desk between them like an accusation made physical. Kennedy stared at it for a long moment, his weathered hands resting on the cover, and for the first time in the hearing he looked old. Not old in the way AOC had mockingly suggested, not old as in outdated or irrelevant, but old in the way that comes from seeing too much suffering and knowing you're about to add to it by speaking truth. When he finally opened the folder, the first thing he pulled out was a photograph of a young woman, beautiful and smiling, frozen in a moment before tragedy. "This is Maria Rodriguez," Kennedy began, his voice stripped of all its usual musical cadence. 34 years old, mother of 3, legal immigrant from Honduras who worked 2 jobs to give her children opportunities she never had. She was murdered in your district by an illegal immigrant who had been arrested 5 times and released each time because of sanctuary city policies you championed. The photograph stayed on the screen while Kennedy pulled out arrest records, court documents, ICE detainer requests that had been ignored. Hector Mendoza, the killer, had been picked up for assault twice, robbery once, domestic violence twice. Each time ICE requested he be held for deportation. Each time New York City released him under sanctuary policies. Each time you tweeted about how those policies made communities safer. Maria Rodriguez would disagree, except she can't because she's dead. Kennedy produced crime scene photographs that made several committee members look away. Her children, ages 6, 9, and 11, found her body. They're being raised by their grandmother now, who works 3 jobs to support them because their mother is gone. All 3 children are in therapy. The youngest one doesn't speak anymore, just draws pictures of her mother over and over. The next photograph showed a teenage boy, his arm around his mother, both of them smiling at a graduation. This is Jamal Washington, Kennedy continued, 17 years old, honor student, accepted to Howard University on a full scholarship, going to be the first in his family to attend college. He was shot and killed walking home from his job at a grocery store by a gang member using a gun that came across the southern border you refused to secure. Kennedy produced the police report, the ballistics analysis showing the gun had been traced to a cartel smuggling operation. Jamal's mother, Patricia, wrote to your office 6 times begging for help with gang violence in her neighborhood. Your staff sent her a form letter and invited her to attend a protest about police brutality. She didn't need a protest. She needed protection. She needed leadership. She needed someone to care that her son was walking through a war zone every day. The photographs kept coming, each one a life ended, a family destroyed, a future stolen. Sophie Chen, 22 years old, NYU student studying to be a doctor, raped and murdered by someone who should have been deported 3 years earlier, but wasn't because of policies AOC had vocally supported. Michael O'Brien, police officer, father of 4, shot responding to a domestic violence call with no backup because the department had been defunded following AOC's advocacy. His widow wanted to know if you'll explain to his daughters why their father isn't coming home, Kennedy said, his voice breaking slightly. She wants to know if you'll tell them that their father's life was worth less than your political brand. Kennedy produced a document that was thick as a phone book, hundreds of pages held together with a black binder clip. I have 847 names here, he said, letting the weight of the pages speak for itself. People in your district who died from policies you promoted. Drug overdoses from fentanyl that came across open borders. Victims of violent crime committed by people who should have been in jail or deported. Citizens who couldn't get hospital beds because they were full of illegal immigrants. Each one had a family. Each one had dreams. Each one is dead because you prioritized politics over people. He opened to a marked page and began reading names. Maria Rodriguez, Jamal Washington, Sophie Chen, Michael O'Brien, David Martinez, Emma Thompson, Carlos Mendez, Rosa Gonzalez. His voice was steady but filled with emotion as he read name after name, letting each one land, giving each person a moment of recognition they'd been denied in life. The committee room was absolutely silent except for Kennedy's voice and the sound of AOC's increasingly labored breathing. But it's not just about crime, Kennedy continued, pulling out medical records. These are from Elmhurst Hospital in your district during the pandemic. They ran out of beds, ran out of ventilators, ran out of basic supplies. But what you might not know is they were also treating hundreds of illegal immigrants who came here specifically to get free health care, taking resources from tax-paying citizens who'd lived here their whole lives. Kennedy produced a case file that was heartbreaking in its details. Rosa Gonzalez, 67 years old, legal immigrant from Ecuador, worked 40 years as a nurse's aide, paid taxes every single paycheck, never asked for anything. When she got COVID, she couldn't get a hospital bed because Elmhurst was full. She died in the parking lot waiting for admission. Her last words were asking why citizens didn't come first. Kennedy's voice had gone quiet now, dangerous in its restraint. You want to know what she asked? She asked why she'd played by the rules, waited in line, done everything legally, only to die because people who broke the law got priority over her. Can you answer that, Representative? Can you explain to Rosa's family why their mother's life mattered less than your open borders ideology? The evidence of policy-driven deaths kept mounting. Kennedy produced statistics showing crime rates in AOC's district had increased 400% since she took office. Murders up, assaults up, robberies up, sexual assaults up. Every single category of violent crime had exploded while she tweeted about defunding the police and abolishing ICE. He pulled out testimonies from families who'd begged for help and been ignored, from business owners who'd closed because their stores were robbed so many times insurance wouldn't cover them anymore, from teachers who were afraid to work in schools where gang violence spilled into classrooms. But Kennedy wasn't done. He pulled out something even more disturbing: statistics on teen suicide rates. In the 3 years since you took office, teen suicide in your district has tripled. Tripled. He let that sink in. When parents begged for mental health resources, when schools asked for counselors, when community groups requested intervention programs, you were too busy with photo shoots and Instagram lives to pay attention. Kennedy produced a diary, its pages carefully preserved in a plastic evidence bag. This belonged to Emma Thompson, 14 years old, straight-A student, loved art and music. She killed herself 6 months ago. He opened to a marked page and read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. AOC says we have no future. She says the world will end in 12 years from climate change. She says the system is broken and can't be fixed. She says everything is hopeless. If she's right, what's the point of trying? The committee room was filled with the sound of people crying. Even hardened political operatives who'd seen everything were wiping their eyes. AOC's face had gone gray, her breathing shallow and rapid. Emma's parents are here today, Kennedy said, gesturing to the gallery where a couple sat holding each other. They want to know if your apocalyptic messaging, your constant insistence that everything is terrible and hopeless, contributed to their daughter's decision to end her life. They want to know if you've ever thought about the consequences of telling children they have no future. The final piece of evidence was the most damning of all. Kennedy produced an audio recording, carefully authenticated and legally obtained. This is from your staff meeting 3 weeks ago. Someone on your staff, someone with a conscience, recorded it. He pressed play, and AOC's voice filled the committee room, clear and cold and utterly heartless. I don't care about the crime statistics, her recorded voice said. Dead kids make better campaign ads than safe streets. We need victims to sell the revolution. Every tragedy is an opportunity if we frame it right. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Committee members shouting, Democrats standing and demanding AOC's resignation, reporters frantically calling their editors. The hashtag Dead Kids campaign ads was trending within 30 seconds. AOC tried to stand, tried to speak, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed back into her chair, hyperventilating, her carefully constructed world imploding in real time. Kennedy stood slowly, gathering his folders with the careful precision of a man who'd completed a difficult but necessary task. His 71 years showed in his movements, but his voice was strong and clear when he spoke. Young lady, I've been in politics longer than you've been alive. I've seen corruption, I've seen greed, I've seen stupidity, but I have never in all my years seen evil quite like this. He gestured at the folders, at the photographs of the dead, at the evidence of a political career built on the graves of constituents. You called me a fossil. You said I should step aside for people who understand the future. Well, this fossil just exposed you for what you are. A monster who got rich on the suffering of people you swore to serve. A sociopath who sees dead children as marketing opportunities. A fraud who wrapped herself in progressive rhetoric while living like an oligarch and leaving a trail of bodies in her wake. AOC was sobbing uncontrollably now, her designer suit soaked with tears and sweat, her perfect hair a mess, her Instagram-ready image destroyed forever. Kennedy's final words were delivered with quiet devastation. Sugar, you've been preaching water while drinking wine so long you forgot what honesty tastes like. But worse than that, you forgot what public service means. It means serving the public, not serving them up for slaughter to advance your career. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, one more thing. The FBI is waiting outside. Turns out campaign finance fraud is a federal crime. So is inciting violence. So is a lot of what we discussed today. As if on cue, federal agents entered the committee room. AOC screams echoed through the halls of Congress as they read her Miranda rights. Kennedy walked out slowly, each step measured. In the hallway, reporters swarmed him, but he waved them off with a tired gesture. No comment. The evidence speaks for itself. A young woman grabbed his arm as he passed. She was crying, holding a photograph of a young man. "That's my brother," she whispered. "David Martinez. He was one of the 847. Thank you for saying his name." Kennedy stopped, took the photograph, looked at it for a long moment. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to listen." Within minutes, the complete destruction of AOC was dominating every news outlet on Earth. The hearing footage went viral across every platform, racking up hundreds of millions of views in hours. The hashtag #TheGreatUnmasking trended worldwide. Cable news went into 24-hour coverage mode. CNN's Anderson Cooper, visibly shaken, opened his broadcast with unusual gravity. What we witnessed today was not a political hearing. It was a public autopsy of a career, an ideology, and a carefully constructed myth. The evidence presented by Senator Kennedy is overwhelming, disturbing, and utterly damning. Even MSNBC couldn't defend her. Rachel Maddow opened her show in tears, her voice breaking. "I believed in her. I championed her. I told my audience she represented the future. I was wrong. We were all wrong. How did we not see this?" The reaction from AOC's district was perhaps most telling. In Queens, people poured into the streets not to protest her arrest but to celebrate it. Maria Santos, the single mother who'd been denied assistance while AOC wore designer dresses, stood outside the courthouse with hundreds of others holding signs that read, "She never represented us," and "Justice for the 847. We believed her lies," Maria told a reporter, her voice fierce with betrayed anger. "She made us think she cared while she was stealing from us, living in million-dollar apartments, getting rich off our suffering. She wasn't our voice. She was our parasite." The Democratic Party went into full damage control. Chuck Schumer called an emergency press conference, his face drawn and serious. Representative Ocasio-Cortez will be expelled from the Democratic caucus immediately, effective now. Her actions are antithetical to everything we stand for. We were deceived along with the American people, and we will cooperate fully with federal investigations. The Squad, AOC's progressive allies in Congress, scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Ilhan Omar released a statement claiming she'd always had concerns about AOC's spending. Rashida Tlaib said she'd been kept in the dark about the financial improprieties. Ayanna Pressley announced she was returning all donations connected to AOC's network. The progressive movement that had rallied around her fractured overnight as everyone scrambled to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of her career. But it was young progressives, her core base, who felt the betrayal most acutely. A 22-year-old activist from Brooklyn went viral with a TikTok video, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. She was supposed to be different. She was supposed to be our voice, someone who actually cared about us. Instead, she was just another grifter who saw us as ATMs and stepping stones. She was worse than the people we were fighting against because at least they didn't pretend to care. The environmental movement expelled her with brutal finality. Greta Thunberg, the face of youth climate activism, tweeted simply, "She stole our cause and sold it for designer clothes and private jets. There is no redemption for that kind of betrayal. Unforgivable." The Sunrise Movement, which had championed AOC's Green New Deal, issued a statement disavowing her completely. "We were used. Our passion, our fear for the planet's future, our genuine desire to make change, all of it was exploited by someone who saw climate activism as a personal branding opportunity. We will not make that mistake again." In Louisiana, Senator John Kennedy returned to his modest office in Baton Rouge as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When local reporters found him the next day, he was doing constituent casework, reading letters from people who needed help with Social Security claims and VA benefits. "Senator Kennedy, how does it feel to have destroyed the most famous congresswoman in America?" a reporter asked, microphone extended. Kennedy looked up from his paperwork, his expression mild. "Son, I didn't destroy anyone. The truth did that. I just held up a mirror and let people see what was really there. Are you going to run for president? You're polling at 84% nationally. People are calling you a hero. Kennedy chuckled, shaking his head. I'm 71 years old. My job is serving the people of Louisiana. Besides, my wife would kill me if I tried to move to Washington full-time. We've got grandkids here, a garden that needs tending, a life that suits us just fine. But Senator, you could change the country. You already did, Kennedy replied gently, exposed some hard truths, made people think. That's about all any of us can do. Now if you'll excuse me, Mrs. Johnson's Social Security check got lost in the mail, and that's a crisis that needs solving today. But across America, something fundamental had shifted. The exposure of AOC's corruption had broken a spell that had been cast over millions of people. Citizens started looking more closely at their leaders, asking harder questions, demanding real accountability instead of performative outrage. In barbershops and coffee shops, in churches and community centers, the conversation was the same. If she fooled us that completely, who else is lying? What other carefully constructed images are hiding corruption and betrayal? 3 weeks later, federal prosecutors announced a 47-count indictment against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Wire fraud, money laundering, campaign finance violations, conspiracy to commit fraud, tax evasion. The list went on for pages. Legal experts predicted she'd face 25 years to life if convicted on all counts. Her expensive lawyers, the same ones who represented white-collar criminals and corporate executives, tried to negotiate a plea deal. But prosecutors had 200 hours of evidence. Thanks to Kennedy's methodical 6-month investigation and testimony from multiple whistleblowers who'd worked in AOC's orbit and couldn't stomach the corruption anymore. The million-dollar D.C. apartment was seized under asset forfeiture laws. The Hamptons beach house was taken by the government. The designer clothes were auctioned off, with proceeds going to victims' families. The book deals were canceled, the publishers demanding return of advances. The speaking engagements disappeared overnight. The woman who'd entered Congress with $15,000 in net worth would leave it with nothing but a prison number and the eternal infamy of being the most spectacularly exposed fraud in American political history. But the real legacy of Kennedy's hearing wasn't AOC's downfall. It was in the 847 names he'd read into the record. Their families finally had acknowledgement. Their deaths hadn't been swept under the rug as statistics or collateral damage. They'd been recognized as preventable tragedies caused by political ambition, prioritized over human life. A foundation was established in their memory, funded by the seized assets from AOC's corruption. It would provide mental health services, addiction treatment, crime victim support, and economic opportunity programs in the communities she'd abandoned and exploited. In her jail cell awaiting trial, AOC gave one interview to a carefully selected journalist. The once vibrant congresswoman appeared haggard, disheveled, without makeup, wearing orange instead of Balenciaga. The transformation was stark and somehow fitting. "What happened to you?" the journalist asked. "How did you go from bartender with ideals to this?" AOC was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I got seduced by it all. The attention, the adoration, the power. Started believing my own mythology. Thought I was special, exempt from the normal rules. Convinced myself that the ends justified the means, that it was okay to compromise my values if it meant staying in power to do good. But somewhere along the way, staying in power became the only goal. The good I claimed I wanted to do just became another talking point. Any words for Senator Kennedy?" Another long pause. "He did what I should have done. He told the truth even when it was ugly, even when it hurt. I respect that, even though I hate what it cost me. Maybe especially because of what it cost me." "You regret it?" "Everything," she whispered. "I had a chance to actually help people, and I wasted it on designer clothes and Instagram likes. I betrayed everyone who believed in me. The families of those 847 people, they deserved better. They deserved a representative who actually cared. They got me instead." Meanwhile, back in Louisiana, Senator Kennedy was sitting on his porch at sunset, sipping sweet tea and watching the bayou turn gold in the fading light. His wife brought him the newspaper with his face on the front page under the headline, "The Man Who Unmasked a Monster." "You going to read that?" she asked. "Already lived it," Kennedy replied. "Don't need to read about it." She sat beside him and they rocked in companionable silence for a while. "Do you regret it?" she finally asked. "Regret exposing her? Never. But I regret that it was necessary. Regret that we let someone like that get so far, fool so many people. Makes you wonder what we're doing wrong as a country." His phone rang. He glanced at it, sighed, answered. Senator Kennedy. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Hell of a job, John." President Trump's distinctive cadence filled the speaker. "Might have saved the whole damn Republican Party. Showed people what these socialists really are." Kennedy's response was measured. "Mr. President, with respect, this wasn't about Republicans or Democrats. It was about right and wrong, about a public servant who forgot what service means. We've got bad actors on both sides and they all need exposing." "Fair enough," Trump conceded, "but we need more like you in Washington." "Actually, Mr. President, I think Washington needs fewer people, not more. Maybe that's the lesson here. Less government, more accountability, leaders who actually serve instead of performing." Kennedy hung up and returned his attention to the sunset. Tomorrow he'd be back in his office, working constituent cases, solving small problems that meant everything to the people affected by them. That was the real work of democracy, unglamorous and unnoticed but essential. In Queens, at the food bank AOC had ignored, a new sign was unveiled in memory of the 847 people who died because of failed policies. "Never forget, never again," it read, with all 847 names listed below. Maria Santos stood before it with her 3 children, placing flowers at its base. "This is why we vote," she told her kids. "This is why we pay attention. Because when we don't, people like her take advantage. When we worship politicians instead of holding them accountable, they become monsters." Her oldest daughter, just 12 years old, asked a question that captured the essential lesson. "But Mama, how do we know who to trust?" "You don't trust anyone automatically," Maria replied. "You watch what they do, not what they say. You check if they live the values they preach. And you never, ever assume someone's on your side just because they say pretty words. Actions. Always watch the actions." And in 1,000 small ways across a wounded but healing nation, Americans remembered what their government was supposed to be. Of the people, by the people, for the people. Not for Instagram. Not for book deals and speaking fees. Not for champagne socialists in designer clothes living in million-dollar apartments while preaching about income inequality. For the actual people who work hard, pay taxes, play by the rules, and deserve representatives who do the same. Senator John Kennedy, the Louisiana gentleman who talked like Foghorn Leghorn and thought like a Supreme Court justice, had reminded them of that fundamental truth. He'd done it without raising his voice, without grandstanding, without the performance that had become so common in modern politics. Just facts, patience, and an unwavering commitment to exposing lies wherever they existed. The truth doesn't need a filter. It doesn't need a brand. It doesn't need to go viral or trend on Twitter. It doesn't need likes or shares or performance metrics. It just needs someone brave enough, patient enough, thorough enough to present it completely and let it speak for itself. That's what Kennedy had done. In a political era defined by sound bites and hot takes, he delivered 6 hours of methodical, documented, undeniable truth. And that truth had accomplished what 1,000 angry tweets never could. It had held a mirror up to corruption and forced people to see it clearly. "Before this hearing ends," Kennedy said into the microphone, his final words echoing through chambers now being broadcast to the world, "I want to say something to the young people watching. The ones who believed in Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who saw her as a voice for your generation, a champion of your ideals. I know you feel betrayed. I know you feel foolish for believing. But don't let this make you cynical. Don't let one fraud's corruption convince you that all public service is corrupt. There are good people trying to do right. The lesson here isn't that you shouldn't believe in anyone. It's that you should demand accountability from everyone. Trust but verify. Support but scrutinize. Believe but investigate. That's how democracy survives. Not through blind faith in charismatic leaders, but through engaged, informed citizens who hold everyone accountable regardless of party, regardless of how good they are at social media, regardless of how much you want to believe they're different." He gathered his folders, stood slowly. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez betrayed you, but she couldn't have done it without help. She needed people to believe her without question, to share her posts without fact-checking, to defend her without examining evidence. In a way, we all failed here, not just her. So let's learn. Let's do better. Let's build a political culture where this can't happen again. And with that, Senator John Kennedy walked out of the hearing room, leaving behind the wreckage of a political career, and perhaps more importantly, a renewed understanding of what American democracy required from its citizens. Not worship, not blind allegiance, but engagement, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to truth over tribalism. The sun set on Washington that evening, painting the Capitol in shades of orange and red that seemed almost symbolic. One era had ended. What came next was up to the people who'd been watching, listening, learning. And if they took Kennedy's lessons to heart, perhaps something better would emerge from the ashes of AOC's spectacular downfall. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not one corrupt politician's exposure, but whether that exposure changed how citizens engaged with power. Whether it made them more skeptical, more demanding, more willing to question even the leaders they wanted desperately to believe in. Only time would tell. But for now, the truth had been told, completely and without mercy. And America, for better or worse, would have to reckon with what it had learned. If you found this story compelling, if you believe accountability matters regardless of political party, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand that charisma without character is just con artistry with better marketing. And remember, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Stay vigilant, friends. The truth is out there, but you have to be willing to look for it.